Welcome into the BlueWhite Tailgate Pawcast. Penn State under the lights at home against Illinois on homecoming. We are stoked to be here. We are stoked that you are here as well. Frank Bonanni from New York Daily Record, Mike Gross from LNP, and Andrew Callista. Make sure you follow us all on Twitter and also send us emails at our accounts and also here at the BlueWhite Tailgate Pawcast at gmail.com. Got a great show ahead of you for you today. And gentlemen, you got to start with Penn State. Massive win over Kent State. Massive. Only
fast. It was fast.
I was freaking out at the end of the first quarter. I don't think we necessarily should be, but Penn State pretty much comes out of that game like we were hoping. They come out healthy, and we did see some things that we wanted to see. Am I correct, gentlemen?
Yeah, I think so. One thing about Kent State, although they were not good, they had a good punter. So Penn State didn't really win the field position battle in that game, so they had to score. They had to have long drives, and they had a whole bunch of those. They had 8 touchdowns, and 7 of them were drives of 75 yards or more, which is how you got this historic yardage total and first down total and yardage differential total, which had James Franklin going back to when Penn State was playing Susquehanna a long time ago. And he said today in the press conference, I think I'd probably hear it from you guys if I tried to schedule Susquehanna, but a little different animal in 1926 or whenever it was.
Yes. Biggest takeaway for me is Drew Aller. He looks like a different quarterback. And I think it's, the stats say that he's doing well and so forth, but it's the eye test to me, just the way he looks.
I agree.
He is a confident, but just a leader and accurate thrower. The throws look easy. They look like, the arm strength is effortless. He just looks in control of the whole show. And he's suddenly a runner that has some shake to him.
For me, guys, I think him throwing the seam route, he's so much more confident in just throwing that route. I understand it was Kent State, but the skinny post against West Virginia, he hit one against Bowling Green, a lot of the over middle of the stuff against Bowling Green, that Nick Singleton angle route. I just feel like he's just so comfortable throwing down the hash marks and between the numbers, and he's doing it by looking guys off. He's not staring a receiver down. For me, that's a big difference.
Well, you talk about making all those throws on all those different kind of routes. You're right. And the difference, the entire difference from last year in that regard is his confidence and his understanding of where to go with the ball, because he could physically, in terms of arm talent, he could make all of those, every one of those throws 100% last year. The difference is in his understanding of what he's doing and confidence. And and as Franklin said the other day, I don't remember this one exactly, it's his 3rd year, and this is the kind of progress he ought to be making, and he is.
Right. So don't worry about the competition, because, they beat up on Massachusetts and whoever else last year, but he didn't look like this.
No.
In many ways. And I think it takes time. Because he has such high expectations because of his recruiting profile, his size, his arm strength, the cameo pinch hitting appearances he made his first year that went well. Everybody expects so much. And I think to kind of live up to what he can do, it's going to take a little time, and he's showing it, though. Doesn't matter who they're playing against. It's going to be tougher on Saturday, but I expect him to make a lot of the similar type plays on Saturday. And the way he's handling his running, he was a big guy to bring down last year, right? So he could have some success, but he's a completely different runner. He's changed his body. So he's still big and tough to get to the ground, but he's not as easy to get your arms around now, too, at first. And that play he made Saturday, where he extended the play, went a few different directions, ran toward the right, and completed the pass, I think, to Amari Evans on the sideline, is
That was a good example. And that's not that play specifically. That's not because it was Kent State. I mean, that was legitimately a great play.
Do we maybe make things up in our heads subconsciously, if you're fans, about the slow start from Penn State and it only being 7-0 at the end of the first quarter, and Drew getting pressured a couple times early on in that football game? Is there any concern that enters into the mind going forward?
Well, I think if you're a fan, you're thinking, Tennessee lit these guys up like a pinball machine, and we're at 7-0 in the second, in the second quarter. So yeah, I don't think that's crazy. I don't think that's any sort of like concoction of an addled fan's brain or anything. I think that's a real thing. But when they got rolling, and again, when you look at the yardage differential in the game, I just think that's, they beat them. Ultimately, over 4 quarters, they beat them every bit as badly as Tennessee did, and you look at the yardage and you can see that. I think that's, if you really understand football, you know that.
Well, in a game like this, it's also what your defense does for you. They didn't create any turnovers of any significant. I mean, they didn't make any big plays, and I think a lot of times when you start scoring fast and furious, it comes from all different angles, right?
Yes,
special teams and defense. Even if the defense doesn't score, it gets a turnover and suddenly you have the ball on the 20-yard line. And I think fans are excited to keep seeing Penn State's offense develop, because the offense to me is going as expected. It's like incrementally better. It's new layers. It's a little bit different positively each week. Defense, I think, still, has some things to prove, and I think it's partly because of all the different moving parts. You have a new coordinator. I think there's some different things affecting defense right now, and I think that's probably the biggest thing that fans want to see come Saturday night.
Yeah, even though they pitched a shutout and allowed 67 yards for the other team, you're right, and especially with the injury to Winston, I think that kind of changes the way they have to think about their personnel groups a little bit. I don't think they can quite as easily go to this 3 safety thing with the hybrid position like Tom Allen likes to do. So we'll see that going forward, because of course they used a true freshman in Winston's stead on Saturday, and he seemed to me to play pretty well. And based on what Franklin said, I thought he did pretty well. His development is gonna have to be really accelerated. And again, we'll get a pretty good look at that on Saturday, because Illinois is pretty good, and I've watched a lot of 2 of their games, and they have a pretty good scheme offensively. They feature the tight end. And Franklin said today it's kind of a mix of the way Bielema has traditionally liked to play and this new coordinator. I'm sorry, his name escapes me at the moment, but so I think it'll be a real test for that. That is a sense in which for the defense, it really is a little bit of a wait and see thing.
All right, so before we move on to talking Illinois, we do have to hand out some hardware that we like to do on BlueWhite Tailgate Pawcast here. Who do we got as a Lions roar? And again, that's 56-0, and the defense pitches a shutout. Who do we hand out the Lions roar to?
Well, the obvious one, probably the correct one, or the MVP or whatever, would be Aller, or again, Tyler Warren, because Tyler Warren is just blowing it out of the park every week. But I'm going to go with Amari Evans, because I think he is a very athletic, fast, deep threat, big play kind of guy. And we've started to see a little taste of that. And he now has pretty good numbers. I was looking at his numbers for the season and writing about the press conference today, and he's now has pretty good numbers, and I just think the sky's the limit for him, but he really did have a good game on Saturday.
Yeah. So we'll go a few different things. Okay, talk to James Franklin today. I think he might say Zane Durant, who some of us are writing about, including myself today, right? Defensive tackle, a little overlooked, but getting the job done. We talked about Drew Aller, but I'm going number 1, Tyler Warren, because Penn State has never had a tight end doing what Tyler Warren is doing. And I think it kind of shows you not just his potential moving forward and abilities, but also Andy Kotelnicki is willing to have his tight end play line up as a wildcat quarterback, throw passes, catch passes. And it's like, if you have a guy that can do all these things, why not use them? And they are. And I think it's giving teams a lot to look at. And it shows you, I mean, if they just want to throw the ball to Tyler Warren, I think they could do that almost every play, right? I mean, I don't know if people understand how difficult he is to guard at 6'6" with his pass catching skills. And his sideline catch, the best Penn State catch since when?
Oh my goodness, what a category!
Since when?
Well, I'm well, this is almost laughable, but I'm blurting out. I want to blurt out Bobby Ingram.
I was going to say Bobby Ingram 94 against Ohio State. I was going to, but
a few catches since then.
How about Dotson against Ohio State? Remember that?
That was similar, right?
Pretty bad, but he made some incredible catches.
Yeah, similar. One hand. Same.
You got somebody in mind here. Don't keep us in suspense. Tell us who you got.
Parker Washington against Arkansas in the bowl game that we all like to forget.
Oh, I don't. All right.
Yeah.
Frank, what's the answer?
I just threw it out there. I don't know.
Oh,
no. You're just lobbing hand grenades.
I thought you had one for us.
I like the Jahan Dotson because it was a similar one-handed stab. He actually had two back-to-back.
He had two.
On that drive on the same sideline.
When Penn State was otherwise pretty hopeless in that game. Yeah.
Right, because that goes back to COVID in 2020 as well. So,
wow. A couple things about that play where he made the one-handed catch. One, even though that was a crazy catch, that was really a pretty good throw by Drew Aller because he had a blitzer right in his face and he had to push it out there, but also kind of fit it in. And it really was right on Warren. I mean, he was just turned a different way.
Right.
And the other thing is, after he caught that ball, there was face mask to face mask contact. He took a pretty good hit. I mean, if it was helmet, traditional helmet to helmet, it might have been a targeting type thing. And it actually looked like he was kind of pissed off, and he kind of like just threw the ball to the ref, kind of disgustedly. It looked like, or maybe it wasn't disgusting, but it looked like that.
I thought he got hurt. I thought he hurt his wrist on the play after.
Yeah.
Then he went right to the sideline.
Yeah, that is kind of how it looked. You're right.
Seemed kind of winded, and he came back in, so worry's gone. But on a freak play like that where you're fully extended and then you have that contact.
But again, to Frank's point, I've said this and written this. A really good tight end is like a cheat code in football. It's like a cheat code in offensive football. Who can match up with him? It's a problem. It's a problem no matter what kind of defense you play. Man, they've got a great one right now, and they might have a great one coming in Reynolds, a guy who was an unbelievably high-level recruit. They're pretty good at that position.
I'm going to hand out one more Lions roar. Mike, you stole mine with Amari Evans. I love that he's, coming into the mold as a deep threat and a true number two. Yep. But I'm going to go with the defensive ends. You wanted to see pressure from them and get to the quarterback and disrupt the game. They lived up to the bill. They lived up to that because they had to do that against Kent State. If you want confidence in them going forward, you had to see them get to the quarterback. They all did. Unsung hero for me, another name that's already been thrown out, Luke Reynolds. If Penn State, I threw his name out on another college football podcast last night. I do believe with the injuries and wear and tear, Kotelnicki's love for going to two tight end sets and working guys around, they're going to need another tight end to emerge. And I liked what I saw from him in his first game. Lives up to the recruiting hype early on in his first thing. Again, I know it's Kent State, but he looked like he belonged out there.
And we should maybe we should point out here. I mean, I tried to count the true freshmen that I saw get in the game, and I had 11. But which you would expect given the opponent and the blowout and everything. But there's a couple of guys who are true freshmen who they really are going to be leaning on going forward. Cousins, Cooper, the offensive lineman, the guard. I mean, he played a lot of snaps. He didn't just get in the game. He played a lot of snaps. And Reynolds also, and of course, Lane, the safety. I mean, these are guys that, because Penn State is a little more beat up than they've been for a while, these guys are going to have to do it pretty much right away.
I think injuries are a bigger factor at the beginning of this season than maybe any other under James Franklin. And that's rough when you have all these expectations and all of a sudden you're now granted they haven't lost maybe that many actual number one starters, but a lot of top backups. And
and that affects special teams, that has a snowball effect or a ripple effect, I guess is the right.
Because their depth and diversity to me are what make this team in a lot of ways potentially special. And if you we're only 3 games in. I mean, if you keep losing guys, if they lose one of the starting running backs, even for brief amounts of time, they're not the same team.
Yeah, they're not.
Because now you're down. They lost their number 3 running back. That did not look good. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine he's playing anytime soon, Cam Wallace.
Yep.
So now you're down to your 2 starters, and you have one guy, Quentin Martin, that's a legitimate backup. And if Katron Allen doesn't have Nick Singleton or vice versa, you're not the same Penn State team.
And in a very tangible way, they used both of them in the game a lot on Saturday. Both of them in the game at the same time, I mean. They used a lot of sets that were 2 running back, 1 tight end, 2 wide receivers, which is a little unusual. I mean, I saw that. I mean, I don't know if they did it a lot, but I saw it 5-6 times. But you're right. And the big deal is Winston. I mean, because I think he was almost to the defense as Tyler Warren is to the offense. And again, it has a ripple effect. Because can they play that 3 safety thing? Can they use Jalen Reed as the hybrid guy that comes down and plays against the run and the pass? We'll see. And again, I think Illinois will be a good barometer.
All right, guys, changing gears from Kent State, looking forward to this weekend against the Illini. It's a 30-year reunion for the 1994 undefeated Penn State team, and that means our 1994 memorable moment is known as the drive against the Illini. Let's hear from legendary voices Fran Fisher and George Paterno on the call.
First series of downs should be to get the ball out and get some running room.
He's looking, dumps it off to Milne at the 10-yard line. Pass complete to Kyle Brady. There's a quick spot pass of Bobby Ingram to the left. He spins away from a tackler and gets close to the first down at the 29. Terry Collins throws. It's complete at the 18-yard line. Looks, throws over the middle. Caught by Ingram at the 10-yard line.
If they can put it in for the touchdown and win, you just saw a great offensive football team reach down into their gut, go 95 yards in the clutch.
They got Tajana Carter in the wing left and in motion to the right, and they give to Milne. Touchdown, Penn State! Yes, sir! Never in doubt!
That was the legendary voice of Penn State, Fran Fisher and George Paterno, as they called a game-winning touchdown against the Illini in 1994. And a man who knows a lot about that game and a lot about the 1994 Nittany Lions undefeated team. All-American tight end Kyle Brady. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us here on the BlueWhite Tailgate Pawcast.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here, and I look forward to catching up with you all.
All right, I'm going to throw the first one at you. That game against Illinois, it's kind of awesome. You guys are having the 30-year reunion at home against Beaver Stadium, the Illini on the schedule, homecoming. It's got to be, when you think about that, a lot of stuff went around that game. I've heard stories about the hotel, fire alarms, everything else. When you think about that game and you're rewatching it, how do you react now, as someone who played in the game and kind of as a fan, as you're watching it, even though you know how it played out?
Yeah, it's still a lot of fun to watch. I mean, even if you weren't a Penn State or an Illinois fan, I think you probably were very well entertained. It's kind of like, I'm sure you guys remember the Boston College-Miami game. Not quite as many fireworks as that game, the old one with Doug Flutie with the big Hail Mary at the end and everything. It just was a very competitive college football game and a very back and forth football game, which added to the drama, right? So there was a lot on the line. The Big Ten championship was on the line, and it was the number 1 offense versus the number 1 defense in the country. Brent Musburger made very sure on the national broadcast to point that fact out. And knowing what I now know about football, I mean, I knew football decently back then, but there 13 years of playing in the NFL and then broadcasting afterwards and still maintaining, my love for the game and watching it. Typically, when a great offensive team plays a great defensive team, the great defensive team prevails. And I'm a living testimony to that. I was on an undefeated Patriots team that was scoring over 35 points a game in the NFL, which is something that's really saying something. And we ended up scoring only 14 against the New York Giants in the Super Bowl, and it was the only game we lost. Anyway, not to get too sidetracked, but there was a lot on the line. It was a very entertaining game, and it was a real pleasure to play in it. And looking back on it now, it's just as sweet to watch. Even though, like you said, I know the outcome, and we all do, but it doesn't mean you savor it more, I think, sometimes with the passage of years.
Kyle, even though I mean, Illinois is not in people's minds in terms of reputation and all that name brand program. Illinois is not Ohio State, not Michigan, and not anybody like that. But they really had a defense. They had some monsters on that side of the ball. Talk a little bit about specifically the challenge of playing against that defense from your offensive perspective.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mike. I mean, you're right there. Traditionally, historically, they've been a good football program, but nowadays it seems like it's a little more sporadic that they'll have a really solid team. I mean, this year they're in the top 25. At that time, I don't recall. Do you guys recall what they were ranked when we went into that game?
They had some losses.
They did, but they had that solid defense. I mean, including players like Simeon Rice, who ended up being a first-round draft pick to the NFL, very solid NFL career. Kevin Hardy, who I played with in Jacksonville, was the outside linebacker. John Holacek was another linebacker. He went on to a solid NFL career. Dana Howard, who was a little bit of an undersized guy to make very much of a lasting impression in the NFL, was nevertheless an amazing college linebacker, a tackling machine all over the field. He actually famously, to Penn State fans anyway, he made a guarantee that if their offense scored 28 points, that he guaranteed they'd win the game, kind of like a Joe Namath type guarantee. Turns out they scored 28 points in the first half. So it was not looking good for us at all. It was, 21-0. I'll save the rest of that story up. You wanted to mostly just hear about personnel. They had some impressive personnel. They came out with a great game plan. They were playing fast. From what I recall, they were bringing a lot of pressure. I mean, that's how you beat a really great offense. You got to bring things from everywhere. Pull out all the stops, be aggressive. They were being aggressive. They were coming after us. They were stifling us, which was not done very often to our offense. We did end up, fortunately, kind of figuring out on the sidelines what they were trying to do to us and their game plan and their scheming. We started to kind of get things under a little greater control late in the second half, to the point where we were able to score 14 points. We're still down 2 scores, though. So we went in at halftime, and Frank, I believe I told you about this last week in an interview. We just told the defense, listen, if you can hold them to a touchdown or less in this half, we got this figured out. We're going to score some points. And so they went out there and upheld their end of the bargain. They held them to 3 points in the second half, led up a total of 31. And I'm not sure that there was a drive we did not score.
Hey, Kyle, beyond that game against Illinois from that 94 season, can you give us a personal memory, for you from that team, from that season, that can't even be a small moment, just something that still resonates, that involves strictly you from that team?
Strictly me. I mean, I remember just feeling a good sense of confidence that I was ready to have a good season. I had some ups and downs in my career up until that point. I kind of came out in my redshirt freshman year in 1991 and had some very good games, scored some touchdowns, made some good catches, and was decent as a blocker. And people were speculating I might leave after 3 years, which was the minimum amount of time you could spend at the college level at that time. But then I had kind of a down year at 92, to be quite honest. I had some injuries. Troy Drayton really emerged. He and I still keep in touch to this day. And, it wasn't the track I was hoping for, the upward trajectory track. And then my fourth year, I had a good solid season, and it was speculated I might leave. But anyway, We knew we had a ton of talent. I knew that I was feeling as good as I'd ever felt as far as health-wise, and I knew that my confidence was pretty high going into that season. I had proven to myself that I could have some consistent success at the college level the previous year. I was really training hard, living right, getting good sleep, not partying and stuff like that, doing the little things you need to do to make sure you go out there and have a very solid season and avoid injuries the next year. I was kind of taking care of business, and really the whole team was. I wasn't alone in that. And I just remember feeling a sense that the coaches had confidence in me. They had confidence in all of us. You know, they had their ways of showing it, though. Joe was really hard on us, very hard on us, because he knew what he had, and he knew that he wanted us to be a tough team that could perform under pressure. And he knew he had to put us under pressure if he wanted to get us to perform. And I respect that about him. He put us under a tremendous amount of pressure in practice, so much so that when we would go out on the field in places like the Big House or Illinois Stadium in that kind of circumstance, it was nothing to us. I mean, we felt very relaxed in the huddle. People kind of are surprised by that, and they have a hard time believing it. But I assure you, we had full confidence in ourselves and one another, so much so that, I mean, there was just a sense of literally just inner peace when we went out on the field. When we were down at Michigan and the crowd, 100,000 people were screaming down our throats, and when we're down 2 touchdowns at Illinois and against one of the best defenses in the country, we just had a sense that we were not going to be beaten. We would figure out a way to win.
Kyle, you said one of the things I remember about that offense that was just how much fun it was to watch and how many different buttons you guys were able to push. And Joe, that was sort of against type for the way people perceive Joe. They perceived him to be very conservative. You just said Joe knew what he had. To what extent did he recognize what he had and say, I'm going to loosen up a little bit and really, really turn this bunch loose? Did that happen?
It did. I mean, I think he knew what he had when he had the recruiting classes that he had in the early 90s. I mean, the 91 recruiting class, being quite honest, my recruiting class in 1990 was only 16 guys. We had some very solid players, some guys who made major contributions to the program. Some guys that actually weren't on that 94 team because they ended up not redshirting. Derek Bana being one. Craig Fayek, all-time leading scorer in Penn State history until eventually that record was broken. Kerry Collins, myself, Bucky Greeley. But the next class, as you guys know, the Marco Rivera, Jeff Hardings, Andre Johnson, Freddie Scott, Bobby Engerman, you go right down the line, Kijana, Mike Archie, Stephen Pitts, superstars all over the place, tons of talent. And as he saw all of us progress together and grow together and mature together, and really the commitment that he saw us making too as a team, even in the 93 season, to being excellent and to not allowing anything, including off the field distractions or living the wrong kind of lifestyle. We had seen enough of that, in previous seasons that we'd experienced that of unfulfilled potential. We didn't want that for ourselves. And as far as him understanding what he had, I think he understood that he, for the first time probably in Penn State history, not to say that Penn State offensively didn't at times show flashes of being dynamic, but it wasn't a consistently dynamic offensive program. They were known for great defense, good solid special teams, just earn enough points to win. The ugly 14-10 Miami Hurricanes victory in 1986, that's a classic example. Tough defense, generate a bunch of turnovers, do just enough on offense to win the game. And that just seemed like that was the MO for Penn State. But then with the talent that we had there at that time, I think he thought to himself, it would be a shame. It would be us not living up to our potential if I didn't really utilize this team's talents and allow them just completely blossom on the field. And I think it was a trust issue as well. He trusted Kerry that Kerry was going to be able to get the ball to people and he wasn't going to make bad decisions. He had learned from taking his lumps early in his career, had learned to be more careful with the ball, take care of the ball better. And he had some great players that got open consistently for him, and that makes it easy on a quarterback. And he had time. He was back there and he had time to survey the field. And he was a great, ended up being a great quarterback at the college level and at the pro level. And that's what the great ones can do. They can pick you apart if you give them time.
Kyle, you mentioned when you went into the Big House in Illinois and when you guys faced that adversity, with all that talent that you guys had on the team, when that adversity did come up, who was the voice in the huddle that calmed everything down? Was it Kerry? Because, from Kerry to Bucky Greeley, there's leaders all over the place. Jeff Hardings is one of the greatest guards in NFL history. So who was the guy that really spoke up to calm things down in the huddle?
Well, it's always the quarterback. He's the mouthpiece of the offense. He's the one calling the plays in the huddle. A game like that, though, you have a lot more time to kind of linger on your thoughts and be talking to each other. There's, nationally televised games have the worst. The worst is a player. You don't feel like you can always build momentum because there's so many commercial breaks and they can last for so long. But that enables you to kind of interact with each other. And during those times, the more relaxed times is when we were all kind of encouraging one another. I mean, but you're right, though. There was a number of guys that were really set themselves apart as leaders. Bucky being the leader of the offensive line. Bobby and Freddie were both kind of co-leaders in that wide receiver room. I was with the tight ends. And I think I had earned a lot of respect with the offensive line as well because of being a solid blocker. And so we all just had a tremendous amount of respect for each other. We knew that we were going to be there for each other. We trusted each other in terms of not leaving each other out to dry with different schemes, and there's so many things you're doing in tandem with each other that you really have to have a lot of trust, and we had that with that group. And really we were just kind of talking about taking care of business, if you'd be out there on a drive in the second quarter and the defensive line did some type of scheme where they twisted the tackle in the end, and that presented an issue. We were talking about how are we going to handle that next time if that comes up again? Maybe this is something that they plan for. For this is part of their game plan. So we just were all about our business, and you don't need to be a cheerleader too much when you had a group of guys that were that solidly kind of enmeshed in one another and enmeshed in one another's lives and that confident in each other. It wasn't even that necessary to say a whole lot, but at the times when it was necessary, there was a number of guys that knew just what to say and how to say
it. From one tight end to another, what are your impressions of Tyler Warren?
Oh, he's a heck of an athlete. I mean, I like the fact that he's appears to want to be a good player on all aspects of the game, because some guys that are very good athletes at that position can just only get concerned about the passing aspect of the game plan, and they're not that concerned with being a physical and tough blocker that can be relied on. I mean, if there's 70 plays in a football game, 70 offensive plays, and you catch the ball on 6 of them, which is a pretty productive day for a college tight end. What did you do on the other 70, or no, if there's 70 plays, the other 64? It matters. You can be a dynamic player in the blocking game, and you might not get as noticed for it. It's not going to bring you as much glory, but if you can collapse your side of the line or set the edge off for the offense and win the edge of the line of scrimmage, I mean, that sets defensive coordinators on their toes. I mean, they can't stand that. It makes your defense very porous if you have a sloppy edge. So anyway, all that to say that I think he seems to take pride, just based on what I see of him playing, in being a good all-around player, and he's got a ton of upside. I mean, as a college player, you're still very raw. He's got a lot of development yet ahead of him, and I think he's going to be able to do some great things. He already has done some great things at the college level. I think he'll even be able to do that if he stays healthy at the pro level.
Hey, Kyle, is there one thing you really want your team to be remembered for now? We're 30 years later. There's a whole group of Penn State fans that are way young. They never would have seen you play, right? But is there something you think, after time now has gone by, what you would like people to remember about you guys?
I think the people that remember watching us play, our legacy is pretty solid with them. I mean, I've had many people come up to me and tell me that that's, in their opinion, the best Penn State football team that ever took the field. Certainly the best offensive Penn State football team that ever took the field. I think we have a solid argument to say we were the best team in the country that year, that we were the elite team in the nation that year. No one that met us on the field could say otherwise. It's a shame that the system wasn't a system similar to what we're going to have this year. That would have been really cool to have 12 teams in a playoff, but unfortunately we'll never have the opportunity to prove whether that was the case or not. But those people who watched and remember, I think our legacy is pretty solid with them.
Okay, so what's the score? Penn State versus Nebraska, 1994. You've had 30 years to think about this.
30 years to think about it. Yeah, I don't think we score less than 30 points. So we end up with at least 30 to 35 points. And I think our defense does a nice job. Our defense did allow some points that year. I think we played Michigan State last game of the year. I don't know if you guys recall. I think we scored 51, but they might have scored in the 30s. So, it wasn't as solid a Penn State defense as what the program had in other decades, but we had some good athletes on that side of the ball. So I'm guessing maybe Nebraska soars in the low to mid 20s. So it's a competitive game, and because they had some talent too. And I got to know some of those Nebraska players when I was in the NFL, particularly some of their offensive linemen, Zach Wiegert and Brendan Stye. And they used to talk smack, saying there's no way we'd beat them, but I feel pretty confident we would have prevailed. And we would talk after that season to the guys on our team and say, man, we'll meet them in a cornfield. We'll meet them anywhere they want to meet. We'll meet in a high school football field in Nebraska. You don't even have to have fans there. We just wanted to see who was the better team.
I like it. Well, Joe always said that your defense is really good, but you guys just scored so fast that they were on the field all the time.
That's a great point. I mean, our time of possession, you'd think when you're scoring 40-some points a game, you're completely dominating in time of possession, but it was such an explosive offense. I would find that interesting to go back and look at what the statistics to see what our time of possession was, because there are many drives that only lasted a minute and a half to 2.5 minutes. And you're right. And if the other team has a decent running game, and that's a great way to keep a high-powered offense ineffective, is to keep them off the field. So yeah, teams were able to sustain some drives on us, and there probably were some games that they beat us as far as time of possession is concerned, but we still would manage to beat them by a considerable margin on the scoreboard.
You think anybody from I'm asking you, anybody from your team reaching out to Matt Rule that he reminds some of these older Nebraska fans that yes, he was a Penn State linebacker. Now he's the one leading them back to what Nebraska football is.
I'm sure they're all aware of it, but I bet he doesn't say it very often. That's not going to make him a very popular man there in Nebraska. It's a political position as much as anything, as we all know. And he's done a heck of a job, though. Yeah, he was a member of that '94 Penn State team, a couple years, at least one, if not maybe 2 or so years younger than I was. But I recall Matt, in the locker room and out on the practice field, and you could tell he had a hunger for the game, had a great desire to know it and understand it as well as possible. Sometimes you look back on. I'm sorry about that. That's my dog. He's not even barking. For some reason, he's barking. But you could kind of tell which guys were going to get into coaching. They ended up just, being those guys who were just voraciously, taking in any football they could, film, or anytime they could watch other games on TV. He clearly had a passion for it.
Kyle, this is off the Penn State path a little bit, but you brought up something that I really am genuinely curious about. When that team that you were on that was with the Patriots, it was undefeated until the Super Bowl. If you'd have found a way to win that game, a lot of people would now argue that was the best football team ever, I think. Mm-hmm. But there's an argument that sometimes teams that have a chance to be undefeated, obsessed with being undefeated, and it hurts them later. I don't know if that means anything, but what, when you think about that group now, how is it? It seems impossible that you couldn't score more than you did in the Super Bowl. What do you think went just a tiny bit askew there?
It wasn't a tiny bit askew. It was very askew given our history that year. I mean, that was another very dynamic offense that I had a privilege to be a part of. I mean, Randy Moss and Wes Welker and obviously Tom Brady, an excellent offensive line with Matt Light and Dan Copen, Pro Bowlers all over the field. And, we had played the Giants earlier that season, the last game of the year, as a matter of fact. And both teams played their starters because we wanted to see if we could go undefeated. They wanted to see if they could stop us from going undefeated. And it was a shootout, that game. It was a 38-35 game. It took a long bomb to Randy Moss near the end of the game for us to prevail in that one. And I think what that did for the Giants was it propelled them confidence-wise. They said to themselves, hey, if that's the best the NFL has to offer, and maybe the best of all time, we're pretty damn good. And they were. They had an excellent defense, and they ended up having their backs against the wall in terms of what they had to do in the playoffs. They had to go on the road and win 3 games. I think they won at Tampa, at Dallas, and then at Green Bay. So that propelled their confidence to an even greater extent. And one thing I'll say, and I didn't say this for a couple of years after that season because I felt as if it was like making excuses, but as I look back on it now in hindsight, it really makes sense to maintain that type of energy and that type of the competitive, just the juices you have to expend competitively at the last, let's say, 6 games of a season where you're undefeated were beyond anything that I'd ever felt.
Yeah.
Every team is coming after you like it's the Super Bowl. Like we played the Ravens, for example, in November, and they weren't going to make the playoffs that year. They had an uncharacteristically poor season, even though they still had Ray Lewis and some great players. They were 8-8, but they came out and they gave us everything they had. It was an extremely physical game. So as the years going on, I feel like we you want to kind of be an ascending team as you're going into the postseason. We were still winning games, but we were winning them by a much lower margin. And I really think we were just getting fatigued mentally and physically, and it was starting to show. We had not had literally offensively a bad practice that entire season. I'd never seen anything like it. The ball in practice rarely ever touched the ground. Tom was spraying the ball all over the place to those great receivers I mentioned, and it was flawless at times. It really was. But then we went out there to the Super Bowl in Arizona, and we had a really poor practice on one of our key preparation days. And Belichick pulled us into the locker room at the end of the game, and he said, "You know what? They got ahead of you today." And we knew that he was serious because they had probably one of the best defensive lines. And that night, they played a better defensive game plan. So they had Justin Tuck, O.C. Manura, Michael Strahan, and Jay, I believe it was Jay Alford, right? And I think he was a Penn Stater.
Penn State,
Yeah. So, I mean, oftentimes I was, in the game and I was going out for passes sometimes, but sometimes I was in on what's called max protection. I was in as a tight end to try to help out with the offensive line. Sometimes I'd have someone to block. Other times I would just be chipping the defensive end that the tackle was trying to take care of. But I was watching the interior workings and machinations of the Giants' defensive line. Everyone does the same things. TE games, bringing pressure from exotic locations, all these different things. They did it faster than any team I'd ever seen. So in terms of their performance, I mean, it was one of the best defensive performances I'd ever seen any team put out there. And to stop our offense, that's what you needed. They had to have that. Steve Spagnuolo is, he's one of the best defensive coordinators possibly of all time. I imagine he'll be a Hall of Famer. He's still doing it with the Kansas City Chiefs, putting together some really nice defensive game plans. So, I mean, they were just lightning quick. They were really giving our offensive line some trouble. Tom was on his back, and to beat the Patriots, you got to get to Tom Brady. In that era, you got to get it to him early and often. You got to make him worried about stepping into his throws. He still had a good completion percentage, and we moved the ball well, but we just didn't put up the points that we typically did. And all the credit goes really to the Giants' defense, and particularly defensive line, for putting the amount of pressure they did on us. Sorry, I'm not really good at, as you can probably tell, short-winded answers. I'm very loquacious, I've been told.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously,
better that than 2-word answers, right?
Loquacious, that's right. That's better than the alternative, better than the opposite end of the spectrum, for sure.
How excited are you to see the guys? I know it's been, 10 years since everybody's been back in Beaver Stadium for the 20th. How excited are you to be back there for a little bit of reunion, see guys like Spider and some of the managers and guys that were all part of it that maybe the public doesn't know? And it's a double-edged question here. Who's the one guy that when they walk into the room, everybody's head's going to turn and be like, oh, God, it's going to get crazy here?
Oh, man, we had a couple characters on that team. But no, to start, I mean, it's just we've been looking forward to it, all of us, for quite some time. We've had there's at least 20 guys on one of the threads that I'm on, and everyone's just busting each other's chops and talking about what we're going to do this weekend and just the fun we're going to have. We're all really looking forward to it. And then, seeing some of the guys too, like equipment managers or people on the administrative staff, they were there with us every day, and we got to know some of those people just as well as we got to know each other's teammates. And I enjoy catching up with those guys as much as anybody. And, as far as characters, I mean, like Vin Stewart, defensive lineman, he's a character. He's a Long Island guy. He's busting everybody's chops on the text thread. Keith Conlon, who everyone calls Goon, he's now a member of the media and does a good job at it. Very articulate guy and talkative and outgoing. So, those guys are probably going to be, the same way they always were, and just kind of lighting up the room, making a lot of jokes, busting people's chops, all that kind of thing. So it should be a lot of fun.
Frank, you got anything?
I'm good.
All right, I'm throwing one more out there and this is basically for my mom and sister, and this is a result of the 1993 Penn State Maryland game. They were sitting in row 6, right behind the bench. And you have always been one of my sister's favorite player. You've always been one of my mom's favorite player. So I took a straw poll around the tailgate lots last week, and I got females of all ages to tell me who the best-looking Penn State player of all time is. I asked probably about 35 to 50 people. You came out with 5 votes in that, more than anybody.
Wow.
Some of the
this many years later.
Kyle Brady
so they're talking about what I looked like back then, I guess, right?
Well, I guess I did show the younger ones that maybe didn't know about the 1994 team the picture of you, Kerry, and Kajana. And everyone I said, they're like, oh, yeah, he's a good-looking guy. So I'm going to, from now on, consider you the sexiest Penn State football player of all time based on that straw poll.
The sexiest one? Did you say?
I'll
take it. I'll take it.
That's what he said. That's clearly what he said. Yeah.
Maybe we should make a 30-year anniversary 12-month calendar. I'm not sure what we should be wearing in that, though, because, everyone's going to be at different places at this age in their 50s. Maybe we'll do it with overalls on or something like that. What's that?
I said different places on their fitness journey.
On their fitness journey. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it right there. That's the terminology we're looking for. Well, I appreciate that. No, oh man, yeah. I'm gonna leave that one alone for now.
I'm 135 pounds, soaking wet, and I made an All-American tight end blush. I think I've accomplished what I've wanted to accomplish now.
Absolutely. I'm not usually at a loss for words, but somehow I just got frozen on it. I mean, yeah.
I have nothing to add.
As you can tell.
Yeah.
We were not ready for that. But
that's funny though.
Thank you so much. We look forward to catching up with you on Saturday and everything. And we appreciate you stopping by, man.
I look forward to seeing you guys this weekend as well. Take care.
Thanks, Kyle.
See you around.
All right, guys. Kyle Brady, some thoughts on Tyler Warren, some great memories from that 1994 team, and an awesome story about the Patriots in 2007. That was unexpected for me. Mike, thank you.
Well, I'm sorry, I got a little off the Penn State path there, and he took it and ran. But that really did interest me. And people who make that argument about, do you really want to go undefeated in pro sports, particularly? The argument that people make was exactly what he said about that, so that sort of lends a little credence to it. I think a lot of people would consider that the best football team ever if they'd have won that Super Bowl.
Absolutely.
Anyway, and Joe knew what he had. I think that's the other interesting thing about that 94 team, because that seemed like such a departure, X and O wise on offense. And Joe knew what he had. That's what the deal was.
He knew that he had maybe the best offensive line, which I will include Kyle Brady as part of that. Okay. So I think he knew he had that. And I think he understood what Kerry Collins would be. And I think that's where you start. And that's kind of where we're talking about Drew Aller, is that, hey, this year Penn State's accompanying pieces, they still got some ways to go, right? But if you have the quarterback that is steady and healthy and playing and getting better and better and confident, then I think those pieces can come along, right? And they did in 94 to the point where by the end of the year, Joe Jaravicius was making contributions as a true freshman, just fitting in with everybody.
More punts than plays at receiver, I believe, and he's diving down the sidelines in the Rose Bowl.
Nice,
exactly. So,
well, you're right, and Collins and Aller are somewhat similar in some ways, the connection between the quarterback and the offensive line there obviously is that they're both pro style guys with phenomenal arms. And that's certainly what Kerry was. So if you have an elite offensive line, he could stand back there and be Dan Marino like, and that's what he was. Yeah.
But they did.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah. But the 94 team did what a lot of fans are waiting for James Franklin's, hoping they can do. And that is when the pressure is on at the end in the biggest games, is making the plays to win. Because people, I don't think they forget, but I mean, Penn State was in a back and forth game at Michigan. Where
that was a key one, I think. Yeah.
Right. They had to make the plays at the end. They calmly did on offense, won the game. Of course, Illinois, they had to make the plays at the end. And it's like there was never a more confident, loose offense stuck on their own 5-yard line in the final minutes in an opposing stadium with it raining than that team. And twice they calmly made the plays at the end to win the games, because you will always remember that offense to some degree. But if they do not win one of those games I just mentioned, we won't be having this anniversary.
Everything's
we won't
different.
be talking about it like this.
And the other thing about it is, in the Big Ten era, Ohio State has been such a benchmark, but Ohio State was not as good that year, and they hung 63 or whatever it was on them. And then they go to the Rose Bowl and they play a team that Oregon, which was probably not at their level. So maybe the signature wins that we talk about, they in the last couple of years, well, they've had to beat 2 top 5 teams to get where they want to go. Well, it wasn't quite like that. And the one, team at that level that they did beat, I think, was Michigan. I think that was one game.
Frank, to your point about Drew could kind of learn from like what happened in that 1994 year with Kerry Collins. I would love to see a moment after the game of just seeing, or even just hearing about it, Drew Aller picking the brain of Kerry Collins. We know he was very emotional last year. I think Kerry's a high school football coach. He's supposed to be up on Saturday. I think Drew Aller could benefit from talking to a guy like Kerry Collins, somebody who's been in his position. And even with the Carolina Panthers, the pressure that came with that, with the early success, playing in the Super Bowl for the New York Giants, being a quarterback for the Raiders with Randy Moss, like a guy who wanted the football and stuff like that. People forget Kerry Collins was top 10 in NFL passing for a long time. I know that the NFL was more passing game, but I think Kerry Collins has a lot to offer, especially for a guy like Drew Aller who's trying to take those next steps.
Oh, I would be interested in knowing what, because our friend Mike Poorman wrote us a piece a couple weeks ago in which he talked about how he didn't name them, but he said some former Penn State quarterbacks, some of the football Letterman alumni were not thrilled to see Drew Aller crying in front of all the cameras the way he did. I don't know if Kerry was, from what I know of Kerry, who we grew up in the same town and everything. It doesn't seem to me like he would really express that. Maybe he would, but it would be interesting to know what a lot of those guys, Trace McSorley, Matt McGloin, what a lot of those guys sort of think about that.
They all could have like lend an ear and just advice just about certain situations. I believe you always learn most from people who have stood in your exact shoes. And a quote that stands out for me is going back into the early 2000s with all the freshman wide receivers. I think it was O.J. McDuffie addressed the room and said, as wide receiver, we set the tone for the entire game. Nobody else. It's us, John, with the DBs, pushing back and forth. We're going to be the ones that set the tone. And that kind of quote from OJ has always like resonated with me. And that's where I get.
He'd be a good podcast guest, wouldn't he?
We'll get him on. He's the fresh juice of Miami. We'll get him.
Still early. We'll get him.
We'll get him. So, okay, let's talk about this game a little bit. Luke Altmaier's having a great season, completely different than what we saw out there at Memorial Stadium for the Illini last year. Brett Bielema, dangerous coach, very good coach, knows the rule book inside and out. Some would say kind of like a weasel knows the tunnels and will look to exploit things and everything else. You like that one, Frank? That was a good one.
That's one extra large weasel, my friend.
I'm telling you, when you call Brett Bielema dangerous, I love it. I like that too.
Yeah, he's
so who are we looking at as the most dangerous threat? And that's something I want to get to in all these Big Ten games. Who's the dangerous threat that Penn State has to be able to address in a game?
Well, I think it's Altmaier as one guy because I think he stirs everything for them.
Yeah.
And 10 touchdowns, no interceptions. He seems to have enough of a supporting cast at the moment, right? So to me, my key to how this game looks starts at least with Penn State's defense up front. They have to be able to come out and stop the run enough right off the bat and put Altmaier in longer range situations early. Don't let them get positivity. Don't let them take that crowd out of the game at all early. Put the pressure on them early. I mean, I don't think that's the key necessarily to Penn State ultimately winning the night, but I think it will change the entire tenor of the evening and the game. If Penn State's defense can step up early, then I think it could be a pretty enjoyable night. If not, then I think it's going to be, some pins and needles, because Penn State's then going to suddenly have to outscore this team, and entertaining maybe, but it's not the mode you want on this night.
I really think I agree with Frank. I think pass rush is really going to be key. I think Penn State's pass rush is really a big piece of this. I was stunned, and I'm not a gambling guy at all, but I look at that piece of it for information, for to understand, and I was stunned that Penn State opened as a 17.5-point favorite in this game. I was expecting it to be maybe like 8.5 or something like that. I mean, I'm rarely that far off. So that tells me that maybe people are looking at Illinois having to go on the road against a quality opponent for multiple times now, maybe looking at that as something that's going to wear them down a little bit. So I think, as Frank said, early on, and especially pressure and taking the fight, seeming to take the fight to them early on, is really critical.
Do we see 11 men in the offensive box for Illinois? We know Brett did that in that overtime game years ago. Is that
he did that, but he also did a lot of other stuff. And no matter what, he did 5 in the box, and Penn State couldn't run that day. I mean, he did a lot of stuff.
I was talking offensively.
Yeah.
Are they gonna basically have 10 offensive linemen and hand the ball off, kind of like what they did in that 9 overtime game to kind of control the clock offensively for the Illini? And the other thing is, if they're gonna go a heavy set, is Tom Allen's 4-2-5? Is there an adjustment? Is he gonna be ready for that? And what is the Penn State package that maybe we're looking at instead of having 5 DBs on the field if Bielema was going to go to a run heavy set?
I would go run heavy. I mean, I think it's not a bad idea to me to immediately test Penn State's physicality on defense up front. I think that's a good plan, and to use that as play action, because he's got a couple of receivers that, you lure Penn State in a little bit. He's got some receivers, a couple of wideouts that are pretty good. And if I'm them, I want to know how tough Penn State is. Like, they should be pretty good up front, right? They got all these defensive tackles that have proven that are back. They got potentially All-American quality edge rushers. But I don't know how tough they are up front at stopping the run in that regard. So what do you got to lose if you're Illinois? I would go after Penn State in that regard right up front.
They're playing with house money. Those teams are always dangerous, right?
Right.
I think this is a lot different from the 9 overtime game in a lot of ways. And one of them is that Bielema has more ammo now. He just has more talent now, certainly more offensive talent. But, and the other thing is, if Penn State has to go 4-3, if they have to have 3 linebackers out there, is that the alignment where you have your best 11 athletes out there, or are you giving something up a little bit just in terms of the quality of players? It's a small thing. I mean, these 1-2% differerences are what decide games like this. So it's a lot of that is going to be interesting. But I again, that 17.5, I just can't believe that. And I think if you're a Penn State fan, you think, well, that is something that makes me feel good a little bit about going into this.
Yeah, it's all about money, right? And perception, and that line will come down, I would gather. But
it'll definitely come down. But in my mind, well, that's sort of Vegas telling you what it really thinks a little bit before the public starts to impact it.
Yeah, maybe they're not sold on Illinois. I think we understand maybe what Illinois has to offer a little better. Now, of course, Penn State also isn't forced to work with a crippled quarterback like they were in that overtime game. So
Yeah,
Penn
that's
State's
a lot
offense
different. Yeah, it's a lot different.
potentially is much different. You know, I just think that Penn State's defense, this is a real proving point for me for them, because Penn State's defense has talent and depth and players and prestige, but they have to prove it to me yet. I mean, and it's not saying that they only had 3 games against 3 very different, not really up to par opponents. But to me, they have the most to prove, because when you take into account the injuries, maybe how they've looked in parts of their efforts so far, this is who's the leaders on that defense, the true leaders right now, and what are they going to do? I mean, I think Jalen Reed might be one of them, but how are they going to perform when the lights are really on? This is the first time the lights are really on for them, I think.
Right.
The way I view.
That's true. That's true on both sides of the ball, really. But yeah, again, we go back to taking the fight to them early, being the aggressor early. Penn State is still, and I think by a substantial amount, will be the best team that Illinois has played. Right. And they're getting them on the road, and they're getting them at a packed house at night, and the whiteout energy, as James Franklin pointed out. So I think it's a pretty tough spot for Illinois if you're looking at it from their point of view.
Note to Penn State and the fans: it's okay to be organic and just wear whatever color you want to a game, and be as loud as you want. It doesn't have to be a declared thing. This is America. We can do what
it is America, and it is organic. You're right.
You could be loud.
But yet, Andrew, the look of the whiteout when everybody plays along under the lights, it is kind of special, though, right?
Oh, it is. It is. I remember the first one against Notre Dame. And I don't care what anybody says about like the Michigan game years ago or anything. When Tom Zbikowski, the Notre Dame safety and a captain for the Golden Domers, said 107,000 people are going to be wearing white, they're not on the field. And Notre Dame with Jimmy Clausen, 4 Heisman Trophy winner Jimmy Clausen, they false started, and then they had to take a timeout to start the game. It's still a favorite moment of
life. And Michigan State has had to do that at times over the years. I mean, it is just the noise. It's just
it is.
It's part of the story.
And I love it. I love it. I still remember when it was organic and kids were holding signs on campus saying "Wear white for the students." And I just think it being organic, you don't need the university to declare it. You could bring that energy all the time. You could wear it every single game. And I do like that. It's special when they do it, but I'm just saying.
And there's no reason why it can't be like that on Saturday night.
Yeah, you're not going to have
it's not officially a whiteout. It can be, as you say, as you put it, an organic one.
Exactly. Ohio State, if it's a noon game on Fox, wear white. Make it a whiteout. Everybody wear white. It's not hard. Social media, easier now than ever. And Frank, you should do motivational speeches. I was nice, cool, calm, and collected. And your speech right there has me ready to rip this Outback football, just like squeeze the air out of it.
He's subtle, but he's subtle but effective. He's subtle but effective as an inspiration.
Nothing like what you did to Kyle Brady and the handsome, sexy thing, though. But,
yeah, you can't duplicate that. Yeah.
Can't duplicate that. Often imitate it, never duplicate it is the saying.
Bam.
Picks for this game. Who wants to go first?
I will go 31-17 Penn State.
I think that's, again, I've not made my pick yet in my mind. Okay, but I like that. I like that score because I think Penn State's offense will hit the 30s. My question is, I don't really know yet what I think Illinois' offense is going to do against Penn State's defense. So I think it'll look closer. It might be closer than what it looks in the end. So how about like 34-16? Yeah, right around there.
Right. I've been terrible the last 2 weeks, last 2 games, I should say. So I fear for my own pick here. But I'm going to go 31, and I'm going I'm torn between 13 and 17. I'm going to say 31-17. Frank, your thing looking closer than it actually is taking me to the 17. So 31-17. So I'm kind of right with you guys.
Yeah.
That's what
All right.
I'm excited to see Penn State's offense take the next step, what they have to offer. And I'm not saying I'm worried about Penn State's defense, but they got a lot to prove to me yet when you're looking down the road. And this has to be a first step to show me what they really are made of, because I'm some questions there.
Yep, I think
it gets serious now.
They're going to be tested, and Bielema's going to throw the kitchen at them and do what he does best. And I'll go back to that 9 overtime game. He challenged his guys and said, "Hey, we're not tough," and they came out and they were tough. Last year, I thought Penn State was a way better team than Illinois, and Illinois, hung around there and gave Penn State fits at time, and it was an ugly game for the blue and white. And I think Bielema and Illinois are going to throw everything they have at them. So a lot to prove for Penn State this week, guys.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I got. That was a fun episode. We got a 1994 All-American first-round draft pick, Kyle Brady, on the show. That's pretty good. Bill Belichick's white whale, as they called him, as he chased him his entire career, trying to get him up to New England and on his team. So awesome show. Looking forward to this weekend. I think that puts a wrap on this edition of the BlueWhite Tailgate Podcast. Make sure you follow along: Spotify, Amazon, Apple. Hit us up at Gmail, BlueWhite Tailgate Podcast at gmail.com. Twitter handles are on the screen. Looking forward to it. Let these guys know in their email box what you want to talk about, and we will get to it. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good night.
See ya.